My name is Nadine Hassan, and I'm the Public Programs Assistant at the Museum of Anthropology. And I'm very excited to be opening this discussion today. This is the fourth event of our Artists Unscripted series, and you can see all of our episodes, by the way, on our website as well as our YouTube channel. And this episode also will be uploaded later. So if you're interested, you can come check out all of our different conversations that we've had. And the theme for today is queer imprints. We've organized this event in partnership with UBC Arts and Culture District as part of the UBC ARTIVISM Festival. And Bianca, who's going to be hosting the discussion today, will tell you more about that. I would first like to begin by saying that as we gather virtually, I would like to take a moment of gratitude to recognize that at UBC, we live, learn, and create on the unceded, ancestral, and occupied traditional lands of the Hunkaminam speaking Musqueam people. And I would like to acknowledge that you'll be joining us from many places near and far. I'd like to allow space for us to acknowledge the traditional caretakers of those lands as well. We firmly believe that in holding the resistance of Indigenous peoples and the voices of queer, trans, and two-spirit Indigenous folks in our communities, we are always working on more respectful and reciprocal relationships with the land we share and communities we connect with, while continually striving to support anti- or decolonial initiatives and move towards Indigenous sovereignty. We invite you to check out nativeland.ca to learn more about what land and territory you live in or may be visiting. I'm honored to be here in the presence of some extremely talented artists, and we'll be having a discussion with Syan Rose and Tin Lorica. I'm very excited to hear them in conversation with each other and sharing more about their work. I'll be taking more of a back seat in this discussion, and Bianca Santana will be our host for this evening. That said, I'll step in if need be, and if anyone from the audience or if any of the presenters have any technical issues, please let me know. Also, if you have any questions or comments for the speakers, please be sure to put that in the chat function below, and we'll address that in the Q&A portion at the end. So without further ado, I'll introduce our host for this evening, Bianca Santana. So Bianca is the artistic director and producer of UBC's fourth annual UBC Artivism, and has themed this year's festival, Queering the Self. She is a Latin American photographer, digital designer, producer, and activist born in the Dominican Republic, and is currently a fourth-year student at UBC, majoring in media studies. In her work, Bianca explores themes of race, gender, sexuality, and media, focusing on the way media shapes our society. All right, so I'm going to hand over the mic to you, Bianca. Really excited for the discussion, and yeah, please take it away.
Yes, thank you so much, Nadine, for the beautiful introduction to today's talk. Today's talk, as Nadine mentioned, is part of Artivism, our month-long festival presented by UBC Arts and Culture. Every year, we highlight student activist art that challenges dominant narratives through live performances, workshops, poetry, and more. This year's festival, going until tomorrow, we've been exploring the theme of queering the self, and I've had the great privilege, as Nadine mentioned, to be the director and producer, and to curate an amazing events lineup with an amazing artist lineup as well, and to create space for underrepresented voices from the community to explore the intersections of their identity through the lens of the digital. I'm really excited to be joined today by comic artist, illustrator, and communicator, Syan Rose, along with Filipinx poet and comedian, Tin Lorica. Thank you both so much for joining me today. And I'm gonna give a quick intro to each of them. Syan Rose is a queer comic artist and illustrator. Her work uses text and image-based illustration to address and process complicated ideas like ancestral history, queer embodiment, and social movements. It's about direct but nuanced communication, and at times journalistic, and other times more personal. She enjoys using both representational and surrealist imagery to capture the feelings and information surrounding white supremacy, misogyny, and other harmful systems, as well as visioning accountability and healing. Syan is the author of the book Our Work is Everywhere, published in 2021 through Arsenal Pulp Press. This book is an illustrated series of interviews, conversations, and writing that explores queer and trans movements and realities. In the book, Syan interviews queer and trans organizers, artists, healers, and leaders that speak honestly and authentically about their own experiences with power, love, pain, and magic, creating a textured portrait of queer and trans realities in America. And I'm also really happy to be joined today by Filipinx comedian and writer Tin Lorica, who is a poetic comic or comedic poet. Tin believes that comedy and poetry are good foils for each other, and their comedic style has been described as someone who's about to give you bad news or the vibe of a sentence without punctuation. In October 2020, Tin's debut chapbook, Soft Armor, and I have it here, was published through Ryla's Ghost Press. And Soft Armor is a collection of poems from Tin's pre-pandemic, pre-Saturn return moments of their life. In this book, they combine emotion with comedy and open up about their experiences in the years before the pandemic, beautifully putting together the words to describe their identity, partying, social anxiety, their heritage, and painting a picture of opening up and softening while navigating love and relationships where your heart might be just a little bit closed off to begin with. Now we can look at a video of some of Tin Lorica's comedy, and I hope you all enjoy that video.
Hi, straight people. Happy Pride, right? You know what my favorite Pride event is? Staying home. Does anyone ever have like one of those days where the only thing that's keeping you together is dry shampoo? Right? Does anyone have any dry shampoo right now? Not because I need it for my hair, it's just like very emotionally comforting, you know? Oh, anyone into astrology? Okay, some straight people are into astrology, I guess. Did we all make it through Mercury retrograde without texting an ex? Yeah. Grand total of exes that reached out to me during Mercury retrograde is 3. Astrology is real. I swear. Anyone doing any shrooms this summer? Yeah. You know when you do shrooms and you're like a special genius? You're just like so in touch with all the ins and outs of the universe. I did shrooms last summer with a friend, and I kept doing this bit to her that I thought was so genius. Every 5 minutes, I would just go, "Hey, do you know what I love? Feeling safe. Just can't get enough of it." Anytime a group of like frat boys or a bunch of cool teens would walk towards us, I would just do the bit even louder. Like, "Hey, you know what I love? Feeling safe." For some reason, we did shrooms on Granville Street on a weekend night. Don't do that. Lesson learned from the universe. Yeah, I was just like under this like logic, I was on shrooms, that loudly dropping hints that I love to feel safe would really turn away a potential attacker. Let's try it all tonight and report back. Ladies, you know what makes me feel safe when I'm on a first date? Witnesses. Let's give it up for feeling safe. Woo. You know, as a feeling, not overrated.
Great. Thank you so much, Nadine, for playing the video. So first, I'd like to introduce Tin Lorica. Are you able to okay, perfect. Awesome. So I'll start the conversation and I'll kind of go back and forth between both artists, and then we'll just do some questions at the end, as Nadine mentioned. So first, I want to mention that you both were the first artists that I contacted at all for this whole festival. So it's just so special to me that you're the last ones I'll be in conversation with. I spoke to both of you, I think in July, like sometime this summer. And it was so hectic and we were still like very much in the pandemic. And I just want to say that their works is really what ended up shaping the festival from even before we had the title to becoming what it is now, Queering the Self. So first, Tin, I'd like to ask a little bit about the inspiration, especially behind your comedy. You're both a comedian and poet, and I'm interested in the different ways in which you see yourself expressing yourself as a poet versus as a comedian.
First of all, I guess I'd say at this point in my career, I don't know why I did that. I'm kind of focusing more on the stand-up, but I guess the key difference with comedy and my poetry, I guess, is that I like poetry because I can hide on the page, and with comedy, I can kind of just let loose and be irreverent and, I don't know, just stir shit up, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. And do you feel like your inspiration for both kind of comes from the same place, or do you find yourself looking at different things for the different mediums?
It definitely, I mean, for me, it comes from the same place. It's, you know, it's the same voice. But yeah, I want to have, you know, space for my more gentler, my tender feelings and all that. And I also want to have space for telling white people off.
Yes.
Straight up, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And like, now that you kind of mentioned that the comedy genre is like definitely dominated by the white cis male type, and like also the audiences tend to be that way too. So how do you create and hold space for yourself and express your identity in, you know, the comedy space?
Yeah, I think I kind of started off in like a safe space situation when I started comedy. I mean, like, first of all, I did major in women's studies. I went to Langara for a couple of years. Langara is the best, by the way. I don't know, I had a lot of fun. That's the most fun that I can ever have in an academic space. But yeah, it kind of came from like, I had a smaller world because you know, these were the things that I was talking about was with, you know, gender and sexuality, because yeah, again, like women's studies is where I kind of had my awakening for, you know, learning about racism and sexism and haircuts.
Yes.
So that's what inspired a lot of, you know, my work in general. One of the very first rooms that I did for stand-up was called, it was called Foxhole Comedy a few years ago. Now it's called New Moon Comedy, and it's run by Jackie Hoffert, and the lineups are always very queer forward, you know, there's always more people of color on it. I think awesome. It was kind of a joke, but it was also like real that they would only have one spot for a non-white or it's like, sorry, a white cis person on the lineup. So I always, you know, really respected that. It was just a way to kind of balance out what was out there. And from doing that room, Jackie's room, it really gave me the confidence to finally like go out and like, you know, do more mainstream spaces like Yuck Yucks and
Yeah, right.
yeah.
And do you find like when you go into the more mainstream spaces that it's like kind of different with the audience?
I'm always really surprised. I kind of felt bad that I shied away from those rooms, but it didn't, if I had stayed with a certain kind of audience, like the safe audience or whatever, I eventually I was like, this isn't gonna let me grow as a comedian and a writer in general. So I started to give the more mainstream audiences a lot more credit, and like for me, that's where a lot of the fun was with comedy.
Yeah. Do you find then like with more mainstream audiences or straight and white audiences, do you find that it's more like they haven't really explored these topics and you can kind of be an avenue for that, so they're receptive? Or do you find like that maybe like they surprise you in the way that, oh wow, these people look like they've already explored these topics, or it's not all white straight males who are judging you?
Yeah, like I mentioned, like I started to give people a lot more credit, started going into these more mainstream rooms because they were really receptive. I found that they're actually, they want to hear other people's point of views, and so yeah.
No, that sounds awesome, because like, yeah, I find it so scary when you're in a space of safe creation with the same few people that you feel comfortable with, and then you take that work somewhere else and you're like, oh my god, I don't know what straight people are gonna think about this. And then like I felt that a lot with the festival too, that people were so receptive, and like so many people, I don't know, sometimes queer art is a space for people to discover themselves and then start asking themselves the questions. So yeah, I'm glad that you took that step in like expanding and everything. Syan, I think I'll jump into you now. Speaking about talking to people and interviewing people and meeting new people, Our Work Is Everywhere is an extremely detailed and beautiful combination of queer, trans, and BIPOC stories and illustrations. It's just so expansive and detailed. And I kind of wanted to know what motivated you to create this piece.
So many things. Yeah, I think, well, okay, so when I started, let me back up. So before I started the piece, I was doing like web comics kind of, and like a lot of like illustrated journalism. More like political journalistic writing that also had illustrations. And I felt like there was just like I wanted to sort of look to myself and other people that were in my networks as like more of like the subject of my work a little bit, just because around the time that I started the piece, which was in like 2014, I started like thinking about making it. I was just really coming into my own queerness and like having just a lot of really, I felt like a lot of my friends and people in my community were really like my mentors in a lot of ways, and like peer mentors, like having like hard conversations about racism and sexism and like and accountability and like just and power. And I felt like even though queer communities can be very messy at times, it's not all like true, but like I felt like there was just a lot of learning and unlearning that I felt like was happening, even just in my own like friend group, honestly. And I was like, I feel like I want to document this and uplift like some of these like intimate, like personal moments that are so rich with knowledge. And like, I just feel like I hate queer representation is just like in mainstream media is just so truncated and like tokenized. Yes. It felt really special to start to document like conversations with friends, but also like friends of friends, and eventually people I didn't know at all, but like I had enough of a body of work to send something over and be like, do you want to work on this? Like, that was just it felt more authentic and like a little more nuanced than just like I don't know. So there's some of the stories that I feel like we see out there that are like just focused around coming out or just focused around violence against people, and not seeing queer people as whole, queer and trans people as whole people. So that was kind of like the impetus for like starting this project. Yeah. So I think that's kind of where I started. Yeah.
No, I love how you mentioned that you talk about these people not as one-dimensional characters who everything there is to them is their queerness. Like you touch on topics of Black femme mental health, Pacific Islander authorship, Black queer performance art, disability and healthcare practice, sex worker art activism, and much more, while also talking about the queerness and being BIPOC and, you know, the unique experiences shaped by that. And I just kind of wanted to go back to how you mentioned it took 4 years to get this work finalized. And in the foreword to the book, you talk about how it was important for you to hold space for yourself, to take care of your health, and you mentioned how it's important to take time as artists to create meaningful pieces and not rush everything, trying to get it to the editor, whatever, I'll just put something together. And I kind of just wanted to know, how you held space for yourself, and if you have any tips for aspiring artists that might be here with us today that might be working on big pieces, but it's just so difficult to hold space for yourself and your health, and then also hold space to create something that takes time as well.
Yeah, I think so. The book is obviously called Our Work is Everywhere. I really struggled with that title for a long time because I was like, do I really want to label work? Like, do I really want to label the magic that people are creating as work? Like, I hate that word. It's like such a capitalist, obviously, word. And I just kept coming back to it because I was like, you know what? I guess I'm just going to stick with this idea of like refiguring out, like re-understanding this concept of work as a lot more like expansive than just like what people are getting paid for example, because I feel like, there's a lot more to be said about that. But I feel like in trying to give credit and value to queer resistance or queer embodiment or whatever you want to call it, anything under the sun, like that includes so much, right? Like that includes care work, that includes like, you know, cooking meals for people, that includes for going to therapy, that includes like so many different things that I believe are like is the work that is like changing our world. And so I guess in taking that kind of a stance, which I think is very rooted also in like disability justice, and I've learned a lot from like friends of mine in community who I would call disability justice activists, like around, you know, reframing the like this ableist idea of like capitalist work, that I have to embody those values when I'm making the book, right? Like I constantly had to like remind myself, like in times when I would sort of get into this like internalized capitalist mentality of like, this needs to be finished, or like, you need to be working on these, like the drawings, as you said, are incredibly detailed. They took me so long. And like, you like just getting so punishy. Also, Tin, like with astrology moment, I'm a Virgo, so like I'm so self-punishy already. So I would just get into these spirals of just like, or like, you didn't like respond to this, like the capitalist in your head that's just like a boss in your head, like, and it's like, okay, this is supposed to be art. This is supposed to be like like some like cathartic something. And I just felt like grounding myself in this, our work is everywhere and everything is our work, like that it really helped me embody that in my own process, also in my communication style with my collaborators, like really trying to infuse like intention and thoughtfulness and like self-forgiveness into like the whole thing, which is I think what really allowed me to take the 5 years and not and you know, and when self-consciousness would come up of like, oh, I'm not posting about it enough on Instagram, or like, oh my god, like I didn't go to this zine fest this year to peddle my wares and try to get like more followers. I was like, all right, enough of that. Like, so I think that like that would be I don't know, like I obviously can't see people in the audience right now, which is unfortunate, but like I don't know like who's out there that needs to hear that, but like killing the capitalist in your head and, you know, like cutting out toxic, you know, forces in your life if you can, that are like beating down on you and enforcing these like toxic deadlines. I mean, yeah, deadlines are real, whatever. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do, but like, but I feel like it's that internal shame of being an artist and like all that stuff that just makes it so
Yes. No, yeah,
I'm getting really emo about it, but you know what I mean, you know, it's like it's a thing.
No, I 100% know what you mean. Like there's this internalized shame of like, you know, especially like seeing the sacrifices as a BIPOC person, like, oh, my parents worked so hard, or my grandparents, or I'm an immigrant, and having
so
that
real.
internalized shame. And now all I'm doing is like, you know, making art for a living. Like that could have never been a possibility before. So like I completely get like that shame and that like boss in your head that's like talking to you, like produce.
Yeah, and you know, I also want to name the fact that like I have, you know, I do have the privilege to, I don't know if this, I guess maybe this is a privilege of like, my art is not my source of income. Like I do other day jobs and stuff like that. And so for me, I think that I had a little bit more like leeway to like work on this thing on weekends. I mean, I was busy as hell when I was doing the things that I'm, you know, whatever. But like, I think that maybe for people who like that they actually do have to produce for, you know, their living, like, and make art for a living, like, because I didn't choose that path. I think that, again, that gave me a little bit more leeway. So I do want to also name that it's like, that's my particular experience. And like, you know, I can really only speak to that. But yeah, I think that whatever, you know, whoever you are, I think we could all be like kinder to ourselves and slower. Like,
yes,
at everything. So
yeah, definitely. Tin, do you have like anything related to that? I don't know if you do art as a full-time job. I don't think so from what you mentioned, but do you feel like some of these pressures, and yeah, like how do you navigate that?
I feel so much of this pressure every day. I just sometimes try not to open Instagram. It's just so bad for my mental health. But yeah, like what Syan was saying is like, I do have to self-promote semi-regularly, especially with comedy, because, you know, like if you're not on stage, your personality, you know, that you want to get your brand out there. I'm too afraid to install TikTok on my phone even. No. I know that some of my peers are doing TikTok now, right? I tweet. That's something that I do. I have all like my little tweets. That's the way I make myself relevant if I'm not on stage. And it's funny that, you know, this is a talk about queer expression in digital art, but I'd rather be on a real life stage than like open submittable, like even once. But yeah, no, I totally agree, because I'm still not at a point where I can make a living from my art as an emerging artist. And a lot of comedy shows, like you get on a show, even if it's not an open mic, you might get $10, $15, a drink ticket. Still. And yeah, I mean, my day job is, I try to get inspiration from my day job. I've worked customer service for as long as I can remember. I think, you know, since I was 14, and I was only able to get remote work, you know, which, you know, gives me space to write sometimes, you know, after work. I work at a call center, but from home, and, you know, all day being yelled at by organic moms who are on a juice cleanse. Those people on juice cleanses are the angriest people that you can ever talk to. But yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, we could all, artists especially, almost every artist I know are the most self-critical. Like, they're just so hard on ourselves. So yeah, I really feel that. And yeah.
Is it like when you go on stage, how do you manage that? Like, is that voice still there, or are you like one of the people where you go on stage, everything disappears, and it's just a performance? Like,
Oh, totally.
yeah,
That's like the one of the very few spaces that I get where I just turn my brain off. It's just a fun experience to just, I don't know how I got into it, because I think in my daily life I'm really quiet. I just kind of keep my head down. Since like I was a kid, I was just always shy, and to come to this place where I'm literally talking to strangers when I do my thing.
yeah, yeah. And do you feel like your work in comedy is personal in that way too? Like, you have to go on stage and be vulnerable in front of all these people. How do you feel about that relationship, or like managing that vulnerability?
Um, yeah, like I said, like I think usually personally I'm kind of closed off. I feel like people always kind of see me as sensitive, so like you kind of have this awkward person going on stage, and because of that I kind of I can kind of command attention, because it's like, oh, the quiet kid is going, like they're about to go up, like in class or something. So in that manner, I do get people's attention, because I think people want to hear what I have to say. I mean, they have to, because they paid for it.
Yes. Yeah. So do you feel like it's difficult to talk about your identity, or talk about your gender expression or your background, like when you're on stage with people?
Not at all. I mean, not anymore, at least. Like I think I've been doing it. It's been over 3 years now since I started doing comedy. So I think I've really like got a lot of self-confidence, and yeah, like I was saying earlier, since I stopped doing just the safe shows,
Yeah.
it's just a lot more comfortable to, yeah.
Yeah. And I also think that you mentioned that you started with poetry, right?
I did. That is how I got into stand-up, was through poetry. I did a program called Telling It Bent with the Frank Theater. And I think in 2016 or 2017, it was still a pilot project. It was basically this weekly, like a creative writing workshop, where it was all for youth, I think 14 to 25, and it was for queer youth, and it really like helped me like come into my own. And at the end of the program, we like combined everything we had written together, and that was literally the first time that I performed anything. Like I wasn't in drama class in high school or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that was literally my start. But just yeah, I just feel like I did a lot of things in my early 20s that just allowed me to break out of my shell. Like, I had all the very pivotal moments. Like I went through like my first major breakup. I traveled on my own for the first time. I actually moved to Vancouver by myself when I was 19. I needed to get out of Calgary. I don't know, maybe it's cool. Maybe it's cool there now. I don't know. COVID wise, probably not, but yeah, poetry, life experiences, and doing I was too afraid to go to open mics, but there was one DIY show that was put on at the Toast Collective. I don't know if people are aware. It's like it's a DIY venue on Fraser and Kingsway, and there was a live poetry series at the time. Obviously, it's not happening right now because of COVID. It's called Poetry is Bad for You. So that was, it's run by Samantha Knock and Erin McHattie, and it was just like a really like welcoming space that eventually I got up the courage to ask them, like, I want to share my poetry on the show. And eventually I did, and I just like kind of got hooked on doing
Nice.
poetry.
Yeah.
And
No, and it's so important to have welcoming spaces where you feel like you can go up and say like, hey, I want to do this for the first time, and then it ends up like being published or in a book or somewhere in someone's house, yeah. And I guess like touching on that topic of like being published, both you and Syan have published your own works, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that because I feel that in the artist community, it's so difficult for us to talk about publishing. It's so difficult because there's so much gatekeeping. There's so much like, oh, like I don't want to work with your person because then that's like my spot, and things like that. So I kind of wanted to ask both of you, what are some steps that you took to go from the idea to getting published?
Poetry's Bad for You is literally was one of my, kind of stepping stones into getting my poetry out there. And yeah, I kept doing, like more independent DIY shows, that and a show called Fine, where it's run by Cole Nowicki, a bar called the Lido. And I mean, it's not happening because of COVID. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that tonight. Where, yeah, I basically got, different types of performers like poets, comedians, musicians on stage. And I did a couple of those shows, and I was really lucky enough to have been approached by Rahila's Ghost Press, Mallory from Rahila's Ghost Press. Their publisher that mainly does poetry chapbooks. I'm pretty sure they're all limited edition. I don't think that you can actually get my poetry chapbook anymore, but it's the process made it really easy for me to finally have work published. But in general, even if I hadn't been approached by Mallory, I would have probably submitted my chapbook there anyway, because I was eyeing it. I noticed that they were publishing a lot of my favorite local poets like Brandy Bird. And I was not intimidated by the process at all. I mean, it definitely helped that I was asked to submit. It definitely felt like pulling teeth in the beginning of the process, because I was like, I don't know how much, material I even have. And I got Adele Barkley as my editor, and it made the whole process really easy as well.
That's great. How long did it take from when they asked you to publishing?
It did happen, and I was asked in 2019, and then everything was kind of finalized in March of 2020. But March of 2020 was
the month
when a lot of things happened, so it had to be postponed for last November.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you for like sharing that process. Syan, do you want to kind of step in, because you're from the States, and we kind of talked a little bit about this, like you ended up publishing with Arsenal Pulp in Vancouver, and actually you ended up even interviewing some people from Vancouver. If you want to show Nadine the slide, I'm going to show one of the pages from the books, titled Martial Arts is the Most Fluent Asian Language I Speak, in conversation with Annabelle Koo and Sayang Ad Lam. Like, how did you end up here, basically? And how did your work end up getting published here?
Yeah, so I think I'm glad that you're asking this question, because we've been talking about how like important it is to sort of like demystify that process of like, how do you get from like an idea in your like to like actually having a thing in bookstores. It's weird. And I mean, Tin spoke to the importance of DIY spaces, and I just could not agree more. I mean, about 10 years ago, when I first started making comics, I was so into the like, I was living in Seattle, Washington at the time, and I was so into the DIY like art scene. Like I just started making zines, and then like applying to table them at Zine Fest, like right. That and there's actually not like that's a pretty accessible venue for people to start like just getting their little shitty stapled whatever is like out into the world. And then so I started doing that. I had like a few little comics that I think I hand sewed together, and like there's a comics fest in Seattle called Short Run that is now huge, but it used to be tiny, and I tabled there a couple times. And then I started traveling. Like I went to LA Zine Fest, and I went to this thing in New Orleans, and some other places, and that sort of gave me the confidence to start consigning my zines, again, super DIY, like in bookstores, like a lot of indie bookstores. I feel like people don't realize this, but like most indie bookstores have a zine like area, and you can usually just go in and ask if they'll consign it for you, which is what I started doing. And then that, you know, encouraged me to, I was like, okay, I have this little body of work. And then that encouraged me to sort of like start sending it out to different online like publications. Like I used to, my first ever like online published thing was for Autostraddle, like a long time ago. And I will say they didn't pay me though. So that was one of those just for exposure moments. But I did end up starting to get paid for different like to submitting work to Truth Out and Slate. And eventually I did some web comics for Roxane Gay's like online publication, some other cool things. And I just eventually like built and built and built. And it started from something so small, you know? And once I got this idea to actually do a book project that I wanted to try to get, you know, in bookstores, and I didn't want to publish it, like actually get it published by someone else. I just started making it. And then I just reached out to everyone I know who's ever made a book or done publishing or anything like that. And I ended up, reaching out to Leah Lakshmi Piepshna Samar Singha, who is like incredible writer and poet and just creator, artist person. And she was the one who, like, I can't say enough about how important like mentorship is. And like she connected me. She published a book through Arsenal Pulp and connected me to them. And I will say that like I applied to a ton of publishers in the States and didn't hear anything. And I think that like maybe some of the reason for that could be because like, I don't know, it feels like in Canada has like more resource. I'm not saying that you all have like a ton of resources for art, because I know that like it's not, you know, whatever, but like not trying to put Canada on a pedestal here, but like I do feel like there were more publishers, independent publishers in Canada that I found that had work that was more in line with what I wanted to do. And that's really just not the case here in the States. Like, I feel like it was really slim pickings for me to, you know, try to apply, send a book proposal. So I think it's just a mix of like getting, you know, it's a lot of networking, whatever, but like, you know, I think that building at the base of it is really building community, right? Like building your community is of people that you're connected to. And like, if there are people in the audience who are thinking about publishing a book, please like get in touch with me if you want to like chat about it, because I mean, I don't know, I've only done it once, but I have a little bit of insight, and I'm definitely down to share that with other like queer people who like don't know what the hell they're doing like I didn't.
Yeah.
And just to answer your question about this piece that you're showing, I feel kind of bad because I didn't have any Canadian queers in my whole thing. Right. It's all people in the States. And I was like, well, I'm publishing the thing in Canada, so I guess I should find some people, like just full transparency. And of course I had like queer friends of friends of friends who hooked me up with Annabelle and Syan, who are these they're friends who are two like queer cuties in Toronto. In Toronto, who like are in this like cute queer Asian friend group, and they like do kung fu together, and it's just like the cutest thing ever. And so we had this conversation that turned into the piece that you're seeing here. And I felt so blessed actually that I ended up connecting with them just through like the queer phone tree or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. But it was definitely like a fault of mine of like not people who live in the state. I'm not as connected to people in Canada, I don't think. So I really had to like, you know, like find those connections. I'm really glad I did.
Yeah. No, I'm really glad you did too. Like when I started thinking about artivism, I just went to Indigo, and like our work is everywhere was like right at the front, like with LGBTQ plus stories section at Indigo. So it has reached like a lot of Canadian audiences, especially here in Vancouver.
Well, Arts
Yeah.
Health is like the best. They're an incredible publisher. They're like, their volume of like, it's like a 5-person team. And if you just go into their website and look at the, especially when it comes to like queer and trans, like people of color produced books, like they're just so incredible. So it doesn't surprise me that they've had quite the reach, especially in Vancouver where they're based, but they're incredible.
Awesome. Yeah. No, and here's some more of the pages from Our Work is Everywhere. While we take a look at that, we actually are getting some audience questions. So if anyone would like to add anything to the chat, feel free to do so. I'll start with one anonymous question for both of you that says, what kind of stigma in the queer community would you like to change or eliminate with your work? Yeah. It's kind of a,
Do you mean, I think stigma, like you mean like within, like harmful norms within queer spaces, I think is what the question is asking about, I think.
yeah, it says, what kind of stigma in the queer community would you like to change or eliminate with your work? So I'm thinking, yeah, stigma within queer spaces, and they're saying yes.
Wow, that is such, I could like, we could do a full hour just for that question. I guess for me personally, I mean, I think that we all, you know, are trying to find our own role, right, in like revolution, because we all have different roles to play. And I think for me, a big interest that I have is around talking about money. Like I try to be in my work and also like in my relationships really transparent about like financial privilege that I've come from. Like I grew up in an affluent like family, an affluent town, like mostly white Jewish town in Massachusetts, and talking directly about like redistributing and paying reparations. And I don't know if that's a stigma in queer community, but I think there's a lot of silence, that there's a lot of like there's a lot of rich, in particular white queers that profit, that like benefit and like basically steal culture from like POC in their worlds without really giving anything back, just to be real. And I think money and talking directly about like wealth, and because the reality is, I think that sometimes when we use this queer label, we're sort of conflating people that come from like a million different experiences, which is, again, like in my book, why I'm actually really focusing on like the differences and more than the similarities actually. So like being more transparent with people about money, and actually doing my due diligence to like compensate. Like, for example, with this book, like I got a small grant that basically like ran out in like 3 minutes, and I compensated every single person that was involved in this. And I'm not trying to be like, oh, good for me, but like I at the very least, base minimum was like, it's actually fucked up if I don't do that. Like, as also like a mixed race, like white and Asian person, like for a lot of these stories feature like Black and brown experiences, and like it's actually really exploitative to not do that and to not be transparent about where I'm coming from. So I don't know if that answers the question at all, but just to be like my most like vulnerable and real self, like I feel like that's a work that I'm doing and want to be like really would urge other queer people to do, to be like a little bit more thoughtful about like what they need to, if they're coming from a place of money, what they need to give back to, you know, Black and brown, working class and poor queer and trans people, essentially.
That's a really good answer, and it really highlights topics that we don't really talk about. We don't really talk about capitalism a lot in the queer community. And I mean, a lot of us are starting to do that work, and a lot of that work is so personal and internal in terms of like describing these issues and acknowledging where we're coming from. And yeah, I love that you're touching on these topics. And also I love how you touch on the fact that there's so many differences between each of us in the queer community, more than similarities sometimes. Like this one identifying label of queer does not even begin to express the complete range of situations and identities and places and backgrounds that we're all coming from. But yet I feel like queer people are all put into this box of like, you're all queer and now just be happy and perform and look hot. Like that's also something that's like, using queer as a commodity and as a look. Even the fact that these days, even being non-binary has a look, even being a man or a woman has a specific look. And it's like, aren't we trying to dismantle gender norms to not have a specific look? And now it's like we're creating another identifying label where, oh yeah, if you're non-binary, you look this way and that's it. Like, so I love that you're touching on that. And maybe Tin, do you have anything to add to that question as well, on what kind of stigma in the queer community you'd like to change or eliminate with your work?
Yeah, first I did understand the question because, yeah, like you said, queer community is such a broad term. I'm kind of just I can only speak from my own experience. But I do agree, like people definitely need to be transparent, if they're coming from like an affluent background. Like I always appreciate that. It's I don't know, I feel like it was always kind of cool to have this aesthetic of like being like a poor, struggling artist or whatever, when that's not the case. I don't think that's cool. But in case in another sense of stigma that I can think of, I guess, is like, I think just looking back, when I was a teenager, a lot of what I understood to be queer was, I don't know, all the queer people in media in like, I think mid 2000s, like it was, they were all white people. And it was like, I think it was like the age of like Prop 8, where like, gay marriage was the big topic of that decade, I guess. I'm just like now just coming to embrace, different forms of being queer. Like just over in the past decade, I've started to become more proud of where I come from, and like being Filipino. So like that's like a really big thread in my life right now with that I'm trying to, I don't know that I've kind of fully embraced it in comedy, but I have touched on it in my poetry. I'm just like starting to get in touch with being Filipino, and yeah, just like learning about, my own history. Like pre-colonial Philippines is so crazy because like there's just so much there to be proud of, like there's so many things that I didn't know that I had to learn about myself, like specifically like trans people. Like I mean, how we say trans in the English language, like it just doesn't translate in your own language. Like
Yeah.
there was a group of like spiritual leaders, they're called Babaylan, in like different Filipino indigenous groups. They're like spirit guides, they're like healers and advisors. It's just like all this crazy stuff that I wouldn't have learned from my women's studies prof. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's like so important to do a lot of that work. And I feel like, yeah, it's just so difficult to grapple with identity, especially as a BIPOC person when you're in the queer community. And a lot of what is queer is just so white. And it's just such a white aesthetic that like, even I find myself sometimes like, oh, wanting to present a certain way, and then I ask myself like, wait, am I doing it because I want to look more queer for white people, or because I actually just want to express that? So it's like there's just so much to unpack.
Yeah, that's what I think every time I get the urge to buy a pair of overalls, I'm like, no. I don't need to do that. I don't know. I feel like I've kind of fallen into that because I've identified as non-binary for almost 5, 6, 7 years now. I've definitely felt the pressure to look a certain way.
Yeah.
I don't need to.
Yeah, no, not at all.
I feel like basically the thread that I'm seeing like throughout this whole conversation about like stigma and queer community is just like dominance, like different like power and like dominance within queer community that usually just privileges white, cis, rich, like whatever the dominant ideology is, but like even within these queer spaces. And like, I mean, I hope that I feel like we are all trying to do work that kind of like fucks with that dominance or hierarchy in different kinds of ways. And there's infinite ways. There's so many ways. Like exhausting.
Yes, it's exhausting to think about. And you're right. Like, I think like it all goes back to like, you know, our work is everywhere. Like it is work, even though it's not work in a capitalist sense. It's just emotional labor or any other kind of work. Like it is work that we're doing, and there's just so much more to do, and we have we're just such a small glimpse of life that like, you know, there's just so much to do, and that can be so overwhelming. And there's so much to dismantle. But with that being said, I think our time's running up, and like that went by so quick. But before we wrap up, is there anything that either of you would like to promote or share or let the audience know of, maybe your next show or your next work or your website, anything that you'd like to promote?
I have nothing art related going on. I'm taking a giant hiatus after my book, which I would promote that. But seriously, like if people want to connect with me, we're talking shit about Instagram, but on Instagram, if you feel like you need like camaraderie or community around like some art making stuff, like seriously reach out. Like I am always down to connect with people and just sort of like support one another, because I feel like that's just so important. And I would love to hear from people what kind of work you're making. Like that's what I want to promote. Nothing, yes. No events, no websites, nothing's going on over here. I'm not producing anything, but talk to me.
Yes. And your Instagram is @Syan Rose. Yes. And anything for you, Tin?
Apparently I'm not allowed to say, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I'm not gonna go into specifics, but I've kind of reached a really cool milestone as a comedian. So this summer I recorded for a compilation comedy album with Just for Laughs Originals / Just for Laughs Northwest. So I'll be available on Spotify and Apple Music, and like, I don't know if people even listen to satellite radio, but apparently satellite radio as well. My dad has satellite radio. I think it's coming out in early November. I'm not allowed to say what the album is called, but I'm super excited to like exist and be easily accessible to people's ears. I kind of have a website that I try my best to update. It's tinlorica.com, and I try to update like my calendar of events when I do shows. I try to do shows at least once a week. I do have a show coming up this Sunday, but it's sold out, so I can't really do much for that. Apparently there's some tickets at the door, but yeah, I post the stuff on my Instagram and my website too. So yeah, that's what's going on for me right now.
Yes, thank you. I guess that brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you both so much for this. Like, it's just still like so cathartic for me that you were both the first people I contacted and talked to on Zoom, being like super awkward and super shy and nervous, and like now I'm talking to you at the very end of the festival, and like it just feels such like it's such a warm feeling, like to have these familiar faces and like the people that I've talked to the longest throughout this whole festival here in a talk with the MOA. And thank you, Nadine and Jill and everyone else who's collaborated. Speaking of the artivism ending, tomorrow is our grand finale. We have Kim Mortal at the Chance Center at 8 p.m. It's gonna be such an amazing show. We're also excited. Tin Lorica is gonna be there, and we're all gonna be there having a great time with Kim Mortal. So tickets for that can be found on the Chance Center website and on arts.ubc.ca/artivism. And yes, I saw that Deb already put the link for Kim Mortal. So yeah, that's it for me. And thank you all so much. I hope to see you all at Kim Mortal tomorrow.
Thank you so much. This has been like, you've done so much to organize this. Thank you. Like, it's been really a pleasure. And like, I hope you're also like reveling in the celebration of it all.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah,
This is really great.
Also, just wanted to clarify, I'm in the audience at Kim Mortal's show.
Oh yes, not performance.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. And actually, we had Kim Mortal do a talk as part of our Artists Unscripted in a previous episode, which you guys can check out. It was called Queer Homelands. So you can see that as well. So yeah, I just wanted to thank all of you for coming out today, or I guess. Thank you so much to our lovely speakers. Thank you to Bianca and to all of you for making it out. And we do have another Artists Unscripted coming up in November, on November 20th. It's actually part of our Sankofa exhibition programming. So one of the co-curators, Titilope Salami, is going to be speaking with two artists based in Lagos, Nigeria, Peju Laiwola and Victor A. Camino. So they're going to be talking about their works that are in the exhibition. And so that will be another really cool conversation to be part of. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming out, and I hope you have a lovely evening.